the basement of the Justice Department. There was a tunnel that brought you to the FBI building. And in the basement of the FBI building is where the sharpshooters practiced. So we loved to watch the sharpshooters in practice. And one day when we were there, my mother noticed a suggestion box. And so she took out her telltale red pen and she wrote this suggestion. She stuffed it in the box. Now, at that time, the head of the FBI was J. Edgar Hoover. Does anyone remember J. Edgar Hoover?
Yes.
Okay, so as you will recall, J. Edgar Hoover was not known for his love of children or his sense of humor. And so an astute FBI agent picked up that message and ran it up to Hoover's office, who immediately had it sent to my dad's office. Meanwhile, my mother was organizing all the kids and the dogs and the football. And then she brought us back up to Daddy's office. So when we were walking in, Daddy was reading the suggestion. And the suggestion was, get a new director. So this was a very early kind of lesson in both having a sense of humor and also speaking truth to power. And those were lessons that stuck with me.
And again, you're talking, it was a wonderful, people have memories as being before and all the awful things that happened, but being a wonderful time. So let's go back to the mood of the country. Something has changed. The country is polarized. It doesn't seem that a dialogue is possible. It's not possible in Congress. It's not possible during the campaign. And so what do you think has changed in this country?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because people feel like our country has never been so divided. Of course, that's not true. We had a civil war. And then when my father ran in 1968, just think back to that time. The main message of his campaign was bringing people together, was healing division. And this is a time when there's no social media, when we only had 3 networks. Between when my father was killed and 5 years earlier, Uncle Jack was killed, the President of the United States, which was such a shock. Medgar Evers was killed, one of our great civil rights activists. Malcolm X was killed, Martin Luther King was killed, and then my father was killed. So there was a lot of fear in our country and a lot of feeling of that there was a huge division. And then we had enormous divisions at a time between black and white, with the civil rights division, between old and young, and people who were for the Vietnam War and who were against it. Now think about this. April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King was killed. That night, 125 cities in our country went up in flames. So if you think we're divided now, just think about that. Dover, Delaware was under martial law for 9 months. So we were divided, and we were starkly divided, and it was a scary time. And think about the Democratic Convention and the police versus the demonstrators. What happens next? My father, of course, died. Most historians say that he would have gone on to get the Democratic nomination. Johnson had bumped out. And that he would have beaten Nixon. Okay, think about this. No Nixon, no Watergate. Vietnam went on for another 4 years. All those people killed who would not have been killed. So all that trauma from all those families who had their sons die in Vietnam. And then Nixon started what's called the Southern Strategy. Do you guys know about the Southern Strategy? Okay, so some people are nodding their heads. So the Southern strategy was Nixon saying, here we have an opportunity. When Johnson signed this book, hey, am I talking too long?
That's
No.
okay. Go ahead.
So when Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, he famously said, there goes the South. And what he meant by that is that, you see, the Democrats, the Republicans were the side of Lincoln. That was the party of Lincoln. So the blacks were Republicans, and the racists were Democrats. And the racists controlled the white Southern racists controlled the Democratic Party. They controlled the slave states. And so what happened is Nixon said, we have a chance for a switch. We should use the race card to bring the white supremacist Southerners over to our side. And that's exactly what's happened. That's why if you look at a map today of Republican control, and you put that on top of a map of the slave states, they are exactly the same map. And so the blacks went for the Democrats because of what Daddy did and Daddy and Jack did in releasing and getting Martin Luther King released from the Birmingham jail right before the election, and then because of all my father's work in the civil rights movement, of course, in conjunction with Uncle Jack. But that was the switch. And then each succeeding Republican president has taken that policy and made it more and more explicit and used race more and more radically. And this is how you get to Donald Trump. But if you look, that is an absolute through line through their politics, through their rhetoric, and what they're willing to say. Now, Trump says it more explicitly, does it more openly, and uses it more nefariously in a way that is extremely dangerous for our country and for our world.
Yeah.
And then we didn't invest in their children's education, so their kids are not going to have a better job than they do. Those jobs don't exist. And then their communities are full of opioids. Their brother-in-law has it, their child has it, their best friend has it, and that's terrifying. And then we are not going to be the richest and most powerful country on earth. China is, and China's our enemy. So they're mad. Now, that's the economic piece of it. At the same time, if I can go on a little bit, at the same time that's happening, there's a social piece of it. And that's what you're referring to. And there's somebody who's saying blacks are as good as whites, putting their finger right in their nose. Blacks are as good as whites, and women are as good as men. And boys can marry boys, and girls can marry girls. And your 13-year-old daughter can get pregnant and walk down the street and have an abortion, and you have to pay for it out of your tax dollars, and she never has to tell you about it. And, this goes on and on and on. And these are important things. That's good that our country has changed in those ways. But if they're not your values, and they're at the same time as the economic displacement, it's scary, and people are angry. So, one more piece. So it's like being.
And I'm sorry, but I'm not referring just, of course, to women and blacks, etc., etc. I was referring to, to what Ocasio-Cortez and a whole new left wing of the Democratic Party came up with. And,
I don't think that's the problem here. I think I'm talking about the heart of the problem.
Okay.
So it's like here we are in New York. You're living in the basement of an apartment building, and the toilet is broken. So they're screaming up their landlord, who incidentally looks like everybody in this room, wearing fancy suits and looking wealthy and, hanging out with movie stars, as I know you all do. And they're saying, fix my toilet. And he's saying, well, just vote for me in the next election, I'll fix your toilet. And so they try and fix their toilet, and then they pour down liquid plumber, then they call in a plumber and they pay $50, which they don't have, and it doesn't get fixed. So one day they walk down the street and they get 3 sticks of dynamite and they throw it down the toilet and they light it on fire. And they say, this might explode my toilet and my whole apartment, but it's gonna get your attention. And that's Donald Trump. Like, it's not that people don't know how explosive he is for our country and how dangerous he is for our country, but they're so mad at this system and they're so done with trying to fix it that they're giving up, and they're saying, at least this will break the man, it will get her attention. And that's what I think the heart of it is, not Ocasio-Cortez.
Okay.
About persuasion. This election is about get out the vote. It is about who's more organized on the ground, who knows where your voters are, who knows how they're gonna get to the polls on election day, who's making sure they're picking them up, picking up their dog, picking up their kid at school, making sure that that person is going to vote, taking them home and making sure that happens. What gives me hope, and this is just a very technical answer, this isn't about my heart or my view of what should happen, but I think Kamala just made $1 billion in whatever it was, 6 weeks or 7 weeks, and I've never, ever seen a campaign that wasn't dying for money. This is the first time I've ever seen a campaign where they're flush with money and trying to figure out how to spend it. So I think that they've got the funds. I think that it's going to be a question of who's more organized on the ground in those swing states.
So,
Streets, if there's a protest, and he's going to send the IRS, which he's already compiled, a list of people he considers his political enemies, not people who have fomented violence or called for violence, but just who have been against, criticized him, that he's going to send the IRS after them and after their nonprofit organizations. He's very, very, very dangerous. And then in the economic realm, he said that he will cut Social Security. And he's going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And most people in this room are Italian, so you get your health care from the state. But people in the United States, as you know, that's not the system we live under. If you're over 65 and just looking around this room as somebody who recently joined you depend on Medicare. That is your healthcare system. So it's just going to be destroyed. And what's that going to do to our society? Anyway, I could opening for a ceasefire for sure. I think that Netanyahu is resistant to that. I think he understands that the day there's a ceasefire, it's his last day of office. So that's very dangerous for him. But anyway.
And Musk.
And Musk. Musk makes a difference because he's extremely wealthy and he pours the money in, and also X is influential. I want to say one other thing about Musk that I think is more important, because we had talked before this, Mario and I, about misinformation and disinformation, and there's a lot of I've seen a lot of newspaper articles, as all of you have, about Russian interference and Middle East interference in our election. But they are nothing compared to domestic interference in our elections and disinformation. But how does that get out there? 5 platforms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those platforms, all we have to do as a country, all we have to do is regulate those platforms. It's really easy to do, as a matter of fact. You just have to regulate them. And we're not regulating them. And we're not regulating them because the Republicans don't want to regulate them because they see that they're helpful in their elections. And that's really the big problem. And that's also a huge disservice to our country. Like Bobby a tremendous amount. I completely disagree with him on this issue. And I think that it's everything Donald Trump stands for is anathema to the values that the Kennedy family has been working on for 5 generations. So I've been very clear about that. But this election is not about Bobby Kennedy. It's about Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. And that's what we have to focus on. How do we heal? That's the best question. How do we heal? And I think part of that healing is not treating each other as them, as the other, but trying to understand where people are coming from, like that whole description that I gave of what it means to, I think there's a lot of people, you're going to tell me that for this, but it won't be as long as the last one. But I think there's a lot of people that there's a democratic shift, demographic shift going on in our country. So a lot of people are going into the schools that they went to and saying that as children and saying, this doesn't look like what it used to look like. And they're going into their places of worship and looking around and saying, this doesn't look like what it looked like. And they're Main Street and saying, this is completely different. And then that's not something about the future, that's the present. They're saying, where do I fit in? Who am I? Who am I? This is scary. I don't know where I fit in. I don't know who I am in this context. So we have to address people's hearts and their emotions before, and we have to treat each other as human beings before we can start to heal. It's about reaching out to one another. My cousin Tim Shriver is doing excellent work on this if you want to see some
conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I think my father had more important things to worry about, and our country has more important things to worry about than that. That is a distraction from what's important in our country, from the fact that children don't have food to eat, that people can't pay for their groceries, that our hearts are broken, and that's what we need to do, and not go down this stupid conspiracy theory.
Good. Let's hope for a feeling.